All right. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Christina Burke, curator of Native American art at Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa, Oklahoma, within the boundaries of Muskogee Creek Nation. And I'm joined today by several women who were instrumental in organizing, developing, and installing the traveling exhibition, Hearts of Our People, Native Women Artists. I'm going to introduce them, and then we'll have a discussion about a couple of big ideas. We'll take some of your questions, and we look forward to the conversation. So joining me today are co-curators, Teri Greeves, who's an artist, community scholar, curator, and citizen of Kiowa Nation, and Jill Alberg-Yo, who's curator at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. We're also joined by Anita Fields, artist, advisory board member, and Heather Ahtone, who is senior curator at First Americans Museum in Oklahoma City, and on the advisory board for Hearts of Our People as well. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. We've chosen a couple of topics to cover today, and I'll go over them briefly, and then we'll jump right in. So one of the topics, one of the themes is why Oklahoma for a place to present this traveling exhibition, Hearts of Our People. The second is about centering Indigenous voices in this project, both behind the scenes, but also in the presentations to visitors. And last, we'll talk a bit about what's next. Although Philbrook is the last venue for Hearts of Our People, I'd love to hear your input on what's next, not just for this project, but for exhibitions of Native art in general, and for the art world more broadly. What are some of the lessons learned and directions you hope things go in the future? But let's start talking about Oklahoma. And from the beginning, many people voiced an interest in having this exhibition come to Oklahoma. Teri, if you wouldn't mind leading off the discussion, why Oklahoma for Hearts of Our People?
Indian removal. Indian removal. It's Indian territory. You know, there's so many tribes in the state, the United States state of Oklahoma. It was due to Indian removal. And so, you know, Oklahoma is called the heart of Indian country for a reason. It's because of that. It's because of the history of America and the history of the fact that Indians from as far away as Florida to California were removed into Oklahoma, where you live. So that's the reason why. That is the main driving factor behind that. The history of the United States dictates that Hearts of Our People should land in Oklahoma, which was prior to Oklahoma statehood, Indian territory.
Great. Other thoughts on this?
Well,
Heather?
I have so many things to say about this. I mean, Teri is absolutely right. You know, the Indian Removal Act forced 39 tribal nations, and actually there were 67 that came in and out of Oklahoma over the course of the Indian removal process. And the tribes that have come in and those that have remained, we have the most diverse cultural environment and indigenous environment in the United States, in our little state. At First Americans, we use two references to help people understand this, because it's often, even locally, not really well understood, even though people are aware that there are 39 tribes here. There are states with more tribes, but if you think about, we have the Modoc people that come from the Pacific, we have people who come, the Delaware, who were the ones who treated in that great painting, they're depicted, the Benjamin West painting, selling Manhattan Island to the Quakers, that the space of the Pacific to the Atlantic and the tribes from the Gulf Coast all the way up to the Great Lakes. Oklahoma and the tribes that have been removed into this created the space that the United States could take over. If it was not for our ownership, our presence, our cultural vision for our people, the Americas would not be what it is, because there's this whole history that produced what is the United States. So this is an American space very distinctively, and it's easy to, it's a flyover state politically. People think about it as sometimes being very rural, which is true. Half of our state population lives in rural environments, but Of the over 3 million people that live here, 1.5 million of them live in the two metropolises of Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Of course, Philbrook is located in Tulsa. We have, if you compare the idea of 44 European nations being condensed onto the island of Britain, the British Isle, that is equal to what happened with 39 tribes being relocated into Oklahoma, because there's actually a relationship, very close relationship of just like square acreage between Oklahoma and Britain. And then we have more languages spoken here in Oklahoma than all of Europe. So this is a great center of cultural diversity. It's a great center of some of the best thinking, indigenous thinking on this continent happens in this state. And that's not to dismiss what happens in other places, because of course it is through our relationships as indigenous people that we have both been able to maintain our identities, foster our strengths as political and economic forces, and also to think about how we could carry our cultures through the most incredible experience of duress and still remain cultural people in the 21st century. So there is no mystery in my mind of why this exhibition needed to come to Oklahoma. But a lot of people may not be aware that Oklahoma is also a critical site for cultural and artistic production since the early 20th century. We have Bacone that was founded at 1880, and one of their first programs was actually an art program. The Osage Nation Museum is the oldest tribal museum in the country, is here in Oklahoma. OU, as the University of Oklahoma, was teaching Native students in the art program by the late 1920s. And of course, the Philbrook, which I hope that, Christina, that you might speak to just a little bit of the history of the Philbrook as literally the center of the Native art world on this continent for a very big portion of the middle 20th century. But this has been a site of, our place has been a place where we have celebrated, we have fostered the arts. Many of our tribes actually invest in our artistic communities. And we have just such a strength here that is something that is both, speaks to the strength of our ancestors and their vision for us to become here, for us to be here. And also the recognition and I think the respect that our tribes have been able to hold in this space, that a place like, through the hands of Christina Burke, which I think you do a fantastic job at the Philbrook, that a center like the Philbrook Art Center, which is not a Native space specifically, would understand the importance of hosting this in Oklahoma.
Thank you so much. Anita, want to give you a chance to chime in as well?
Sure. I want to add on to what Teri and Heather have said, earlier, and that is because of the 39 tribes that reside here in Oklahoma, with only a few of them being considered indigenous, that our unique histories need to be told. I have a real strong feeling of that exhibitions as Hearts of Our People, it gives us an opportunity to tell our stories. Our stories absolutely have to be told within where we live. In this state, there are there's many people in Oklahoma who do not know the history of Oklahoma, do not know how these tribes arrived here, do not know that we are not all one people, that, like as Heather said, that we have, very distinct, unique histories, cultures that vary from each other because of where we came from. They're not aware of displacement. They're not aware of forced marches. So I believe that, these types of exhibitions give us the opportunity to continue to tell our stories. And laws and regulations, they define a lot of times us as Indian people. And, they regulate us, they put boundaries on us, they find ways to oppress us. And this is not beneficial to us or anybody else in the state. And so they send messages that we don't matter. That our cultures aren't important. And so when we have the opportunity to be able to have exhibitions such as Hearts of Our People, this tells the general public and people that we are indeed important, and that we come from beautiful places, and that our cultures are beautiful and important. Also echoing, what has been said, we have a rich history here of public art, museums, exhibitions that have gone on before. We're building on what has already been put in place here, and this gives us also another opportunity to continue that. There is such a rich history here of Native art, from the beginning to this time, art is going to be the thread that, you know, links us to the past, to the present, and on into the future. So we've had, you know, great teachers like Mary Jo Watson. We've had great artists. I mean, that list, we could talk about that for this whole entire hour, you know, of the women who came before us, who made art, who inspired us, who kept things alive, you know, not only for their own people, but for other women artists who inspired us. I know as a young woman, I was inspired by many of these women. Karita Coffey, you know, she made things out of clay, and she was kind of really one of the first Native women that was my understanding to make contemporary objects out of clay. So I was very inspired by her work. And we have, you know, these institutions that sit on Native land or allotments, you know, original allotments. I think it's important for those, you know, a show like Hearts of Our People that show that they're making a commitment towards, again, telling these stories, but also a commitment towards, you know, what can we do? What can we continue to keep doing? How can we keep these kinds of things alive? These commitments need to be made by these institutions that, again, let's, you know, you could just start with the history of the institution, like tell the truth, tell who was here before you. I'm a big proponent of, in history, you know, of let's just begin with the truth of how everything began, and we can go from there. So many of these institutions house our collections, our objects, you know, things from that inform us of who we were and are and have defined us, you know, defined our traditions. They need to be committed to involving our Native communities in those discussions and how things are going to be handled and how those things are going to be displayed. And I think that the framework of Hearts of Our People, how it was organized, holds within it, you know, many, many lessons for these institutions on how to proceed into the future.
Thank you. Well, and Jill, you and I can speak a little bit about being non-Indigenous curators of Native art at institutions that have collections of Native art, but are not tribal institutions. Can you talk a little bit about your institution developing this show and why it was?
Why? I'm sorry, you froze up a little bit.
We'll just talk. I think she's frozen, so just talk.
Well, I'd like to just also acknowledge that everything, I mean, that Heather and Teri and Anita spoke about was just so beautifully eloquent and speaks to the power of our board. And that I've been thinking about it lately, and maybe this segues into the next kind of question, but I thought about it last night, and you know, this is what creates a symphony. That hearing these women's voices is like, I feel like Hearts of Our People was creating a symphony, and thinking about creating curatorial opportunities that create symphonies with many different players in mind is only expands the beauty of the music, right? It's not just one particular solo artist, but it is a collectivity. And I've just been thinking about that. And I'd also like to commend the Philbrook too, from the get-go. Teri and I knew that we and the board wanted this to be at the Philbrook, and the Philbrook committed to this from the very beginning. And to be quite honest, you know, some other institutions around the country and inside the United States and in Canada were reluctant to commit early on. And once the success of Hearts of Our People was acknowledged in the press and in a different kind of variety of places, then Teri and I got the call from all of these other art institutions saying, oh, can we have Hearts of Our People? Can we have Hearts of Our People? Can we? And we're like, well, where were you 4 years ago? The Philbrook was with us 5, 6 now years ago. And that's really important to recognize, because you saw that the Philbrook saw the importance of this exhibition, and that says a lot.
Well, thank you. I'm grateful for the support of the leadership here, particularly during the last several months, which have been a challenge for all of us. This pandemic has affected every single aspect of our personal and professional lives. And it has not been easy. And just a quick note about the installation here at Philbrook. There are several aspects of the exhibition that, because of logistics and because of the pandemic, we have installed in our gardens and grounds. So Rose Simpson's spectacular car, Maria, has its own display case on our property, and also the poems and literary texts, which are an important part of this exhibition. We installed in the gardens in a poetry walk, both the audio texts as well as written texts, to allow our visitors to stay safe in different parts of the campus, but also give a new context of being outside in this land, to hear some of those voices, to read those words, to experience that artwork as well. So we've, like everybody in every aspect, we've had to pivot in a way, but hopefully make the most, make some creative decisions about these challenges that we're all facing. So we've touched on it a little bit, but I think from my perspective, one of the most important aspects of this exhibition is centering Indigenous voices, both behind the scenes with the advisory board and those voices and those community members who provided knowledge, input, wisdom, suggestions, commentary, edits, as well as the literal voices in the videos, in those literary texts, in the object labels. Can you all speak to that a little bit, both in terms of the logistics, but also the significance of it for you as artists and curators?
I'm going to start it just because it kind of started between Jill and I, and it started with our experiences, me as an artist and her as a curator, and her and I in talking about it and realizing that actually there had never been an exhibition, a major exhibition of historic nature, or like through history, of Native women's art that focused on that. And so when she asked me to do that, I immediately, of course, said yes, but then woke up in the middle of the night, freaked out by what I had said yes to, because I knew that I had no rights to speak for all these other ladies. Like, you know, as a Kiowa person, we have proper ways of doing things, and I would never think to go and speak for anyone else. In fact, even as a woman, like to go and speak for yourself, you usually put someone else in front of you to speak for you. So there was a whole bunch of things about being asked to curate that immediately my kind of Indian feathers went up, because I was like, well, I want to, but I'm like, you know, I'm a little like, this is like not the way I would feel comfortable doing it. And so immediately the very most important thing was that I can't speak for Osage. I can't speak for Navajo. Who am I? I'm nobody. So with that realization, I went to Jill and I said, we need an advisory board, like a big one. Like, we need an advisory board. And her experience in it and my experiences she was immediately open to it. Immediately open to the fact that she also didn't contain enough knowledge to pull off something as large as this. Like, we both knew the limits of our knowledge, and we knew that we needed help with it. And so, and we knew that just in the proper manner of presenting things, it would be important to have all of these voices. And so, and then again, my experience as an artist was, I had been asked over my career multiple times to sit on advisory committees for exhibitions of Native American art. And my experience was always the same, which is we are, as Indians, called into an advisory meeting by white curators, usually men who have an idea. They present us with their idea. They show us all the objects that they're already going to use out of their collection. And then we talk amongst ourselves and they take notes, and then we never see hide nor hair of them again. They treat us nice, they feed us well, and they give us money to do that. But what am I left with? I'm left with the feeling of, well, as a Native person, what did I just do? What did I just participate in? Because I feel like I said some things and I don't know whether they're going to use it or not. They never got back to me about the exhibition. I don't know whether the exhibition was right, or how did they use my words. So I'm not going to participate in that anymore, because I don't know how these people are running this. And then I realized, of course, I'm just a check mark for their NEH or NEA grant. All that grant writing stuff requires Indian input. Well, That is why centering Indigenous voices was so damn important for us in Hearts of Our People. Because as Native people, I know Anita's probably had this experience. I imagine Heather's had this experience. Native people are called in all the time as the experts. We're past the mic, but they hang on to the mic and they'll let you talk and then they pull that mic back. And that's what I didn't want to participate in. And Jill was a willing partner who took a lot of hits from her institution and from the industry that she's a part of, right? The art industry that she's a part of. She took a lot of hits about what it is to give up curatorial control. And in our eyes, it was, well, we can't, it's a group effort. It is the symphony. It was the symphony that she was talking about. She had heard the symphony and I knew it, like, you know, Indian people, you know, we knew that, right? But it was her defending that in that place, because this is not, it was unusual. It had this way of using so many people and asking them to be a part of it, not just at the beginning, but all the way through the process to this moment. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Heather. Thank you for being there with us, because to this moment, we've asked you to help us guide this through. So, and that to me is Indigenous. That's Indian way. That's Indian way, you know, and hopefully, you know, in your generosity that you all receive back from us too, you know, that's the reciprocity part of it. So all of it, that manner of thinking about producing a show, organizing a show, arranging a show, collaborating, you know, collaboration, let's collaborate. Well, collaboration has always been one way. That's not collaboration. That's you guys just using us. So if you really mean collaboration, then listen to what we said. We need more. Yes. We need more. Oh, I don't know. They're not letting us have more. They're giving us trouble more. Well, I'm going to defend this now. That's what collaboration means. That means putting your neck on the line to defend what we know we need to have happen. So I appreciate that. And I thank you, ladies, for doing that for us.
Well, one of the things that I just want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Well, I think that, you know, what, God, Teri, your mind is so sharp. And I'm just thinking about like how this idea of centering Indigenous voices is more than just having Native people on the advisory panel, because that's the part of it, is that like we're still just called the advisory panel, in the same way that I serve on multiple advisory panels, and half the time my experiences are exactly what Teri has just described. Is, you know, that you're playing a role, you're hoping that your contribution will be something beneficial to the community broadly. We don't do this for ourselves, to be honest. Sometimes it's exhausting to sit on these advisory committees, but you want to do that because if we are given the opportunity to create that space, to hold that space for an Indigenous voice within a project at whatever measure, you want to step up and take that and, you know, and then share that space. Like that's the other part of it. But this is all an effect, it's all a reflection of, you know, these Indigenous relationships that we have with one another, the respect that we operate in regards with how we treat one another. I mean, I think that people will look at the things that both Jill and Teri have said about, you know, just recognizing for themselves that they didn't know enough. That's not a matter of them not having had the capacity from most museums' perspectives of doing the show without them by themselves. What that is that's an example of the respect that they have, that other people need to have a voice in this conversation. And that to me is just that respect. And then the relationships that were fostered this, the relationships that have been fostered from the project. I mean, I've met some amazing people that I've admired from afar, but through this project now have, like, you know, direct relationships with them. And the basket that has been woven out of this project is just freaking incredible, because the bar has been lifted. And it was from these ladies having the respect, counting and knowing that they could wager everything on these relationships, and that the relationships were going to hold up. Because within our communities, our Indigenous communities, and I don't just mean Indigenous people, because I consider both Christina and Jill a member of our extended Indigenous community as strong, important allies. and that there's a respect, but also a reciprocity. That if you are expressing something as important, that you're willing to take that, and as Teri was explaining, you're willing to take that information, and whether you fully understand it or not, because of your respect and your relationship with that person, you're willing to stand up and defend it. And this is a super critical part of all of this, of centering Indigenous voices, because there is no doubt, and I spoke to this at the opening, and it's a great thing for us to be here at the end to be able to say that I have, as a curator working in an institution, I have a very clear idea of what Jill had to do to hold that door open for the rest of us to be a part of it, because it very easily could have been slammed on her face and she could have been sent to the side trying to figure out how to mend the relationships that were being severed by an institution that did not want to support. And I'm not saying that Minneapolis Institute of Art didn't want to support it. I'm just saying this was a testament to the power of those relationships, the power of the strength of them, and the importance of centering those Indigenous voices. Our voices are not just opinions. They're not just a reflection of a single person's ideas about things. It is us understanding that our expressive arts are a matter of our cultural capital, right? If you think of capital as being the thing that you value the most, in a capitalistic society, the thing you value the most is the money, because that's the thing that makes everything move. Well, in Indigenous communities, culture is our capital. And that is the thing that we are both willing to die for, to fight for, to live for. And it's the thing that gives us the motivation. And what Hearts of Our People did was it gave us an opportunity to lay down our most important bets on what we felt like could have an impact on people who were not Indigenous, to understanding the value of what our cultures mean to people. And I think that that's really critical here. While we were talking before, I just want to say, this was not an easy project. The Centering Indigenous Voices came with great effort because, one, any traveling exhibition can only hold a certain number of materials. Any traveling exhibition can only go so many places because the objects really need to be cared for. We were not putting these things out there not to care for them. And even just representing as a curator, as a member of the advisory board, and there were so many artists that we had to make those difficult decisions about which piece could stand in and represent others who can't be in the show because of these like physical, material, economic, spatial limitations that a traveling show has to reckon with. And just from Oklahoma, I'm just going to read you a list, and I promise it won't take that long, but it's worth mentioning every one of these names. Ruth Blaylock Jones, Joan Hill, Karita Coffey, Sarah Bates, so many basket weavers from our Oklahoma community, even including my great aunt, Fannie Wesley, Martha Berry, Judy Kozer, Vanessa Jennings, Lois Smokey Collady, Anna Mitchell, Jane Ostie, Jerry Redcorn, Mildred Cleghorn, Jerry Redcorn and Mildred Cleghorn, Alice Littleman, Ardina Moore, Josephine Wack, Georgianne Robinson, Sandy Fife, her sister, Jimmy Carroll Fife, Virginia Stroud, Sharon ahtone Harjo, Jean Bales, Gina Gray, Valjean McCarty Hessing, Norma Howard, Sharon Erla, Jane McCarty Malden, of course, America Meredith, Dana Tiger, Jenny Ross Cobb, Shan Goshorn, Wendy Masetki Pula. There were so many names. And when you go see this exhibition, there's just a handful that ended up being able to be in the exhibition. These were painful decisions. So when we say centering our Indigenous voices, it was not simply just to put our best assets forward and to make our advice to them, but it was also carrying the responsibility then for making the best choices that we could to make an incredibly strong exhibition. I'm really honored to have been a part of it and very, very much blessed by all of the women that are on this panel and having you in my life and knowing that we're all in this. It is an industry. Museums are an industry, and being in this industry together and knowing that I have people who understand the things that I operate on and continue to move forward with, it's really foundational. And to think that this exhibition took all of that, which is none of that is historically what museums have done, and was selected as one of the top 10 museum or top 10 exhibitions of the 2010s. That's the kind of international credit that this exhibition earned on its own. And it was because of the willingness to hold that space for these voices.
Oh. One of the things that I just want to chime in briefly about the ongoing relationships that you all have talked about, and that these continue to this day. So from my experience installing the show here at Philbrook, there were questions about, installation details and some objects that might not fit for a variety of reasons, including that if they needed a new display case to be built, because of the pandemic, there is a global shortage of plexiglass and vitrines. So we had to make some tough decisions because of that situation. But because of the ongoing relationships with co-curators, advisory board members, artists, and I had a question about Gahano's beadwork and outfit, I immediately got in touch with Teri and Jill and said, look, I'm not sure that we can display this object. How can we, can we include a historical photograph of the outfit? And they said, well, maybe, but we need to talk with Carla Hemlock and Jolene Rickard and some advisory board members from that community. And so I emailed them and they immediately emailed back. It's not just that I had their emails at the ready and that the three of us as curators were talking about it. It's that those advisory board members were still involved, responsible, and part of the ongoing conversation, felt that responsibility to get back to me right away, even though they knew they weren't traveling to Tulsa for an opening event or for a program. But they also felt their continuing role in how the exhibition is presented. So they got back to me right away and said, what about this? What about this? Here's a solution. And so we came up with a solution. So those relationships go on. It's not about checking a box. It's that these conversations continue to this day. And I'm
calling you right now to tell you something.
Got advisory board members who have me on speed dial saying,
Me, no.
Well, so in some ways that is a segue then to our last topic, thinking about what's next. So as has been mentioned, Philbrook is the last venue for Hearts of Our People, but that doesn't mean that these conversations, these relationships, and that these processes in developing exhibitions stop now. So I'm wondering if you all can speak about what's next in terms of museum exhibitions specifically, in terms of the art world writ large, in terms of your own work, what's next?
Anita, go.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, first of all, I want to say how beautiful, what you said, and I too am so honored to stand next to you, to be with you. I know, like me, you believe in the absolute power of art and the healing that takes place when you create things and make things. And not only that, but also understanding where we come from and why it's so important for this to just continue and continue and continue. And making art and having exhibitions is one way that we can achieve those kinds of things. So I guess I would have to put the analogy of we're going to put one coil on top of each other, and then we're going to blend them together, to create a vessel that holds all of these beautiful thoughts and ideas and languages and all the words that you said that were so very beautiful. So for me, right now, at this current time, I am with the Tulsa Artists Fellowship. I'm in my 4th year here in Tulsa, as an awardee of the Integrated Grant Award, which gives me space and finances to launch a project. Because of the pandemic, I had to totally rewrite my project because I was actually trying to gather people together to create a clay installation. And the brakes were put on that real quick. So I changed it to a different format where I am inviting people to help me create a textile and a visual art narrative about the time that we are living in right now. I'm asking people to respond to the idea of the void that is left in our lives because of COVID, of us not being able to meet in groups, of us missing out on family gatherings, at feast, you know, whatever community we come from, there is a void there. And so I'm asking people to respond to that. And so we have put out a call, and actually we are in our third day of handing out supply kits that hold all of the information and all of the supplies that you need to participate in this. And we're asking people to go home and make these with there's a very lengthy, I think it's 3 pages long instruction sheet, because we want to make sure and get everything in there, you know, so that people understood that you don't have to be an artist to participate in this. We want to gather people in the way that we can do it this time. And so this will be given to an institution, and to just document the here and now, document what's going on right now. So you can find that information if you want to join up with the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, with their social media, with my social media. Anita Fields is my Instagram page, and I have a Facebook page. So yeah, that's what's going on here. And I also kind of want to add that the Tulsa Artist Fellowship has 10 Native artists right now that are writers, visual artists, poets. You know, our own poet laureate, the U.S. poet laureate, Joy Harjo is one of the fellows, and so, you know, we're real proud of that. And they're doing lots of things, you know, making films, writing, performance art. There's many, many, many venues to tell our stories and our narratives.
I'm doing this. I'm surviving right now, so I don't have any big, huge projects coming up. The pandemic punched me in the gut in a way I was not prepared for. I'm glad that I have this exhibition, because this exhibition reminds me just of what Anita said, that art is healing. And so I think that I think that it's just very important, and I'm extremely appreciative to be a part of this exhibition and this process and thinking about art in this way. You know, I've spent a lot of time in museums in my lifetime. My mother loved museums. I spent a lot of time with her in museums. She was a docent. She was always involved. She was always doing programming and all kinds of good things for museums. And so they hold a really, you know, a good spot in my heart. Museums help us understand who we are, whether it's scientifically or, you know, at a cellular level, whether it's, you know, the stars above, like whatever it is, museums tell us who we are. They help us to understand who we are. And so it is really important for museums to tell a truthful story. And it is my call out to all museum people that are out there that might possibly be listening, and any Native people that might possibly be working with the museum, that remember that there are little kids that go through those museums. Any museum, there's little kids, there's troops of children that go through these museums all throughout the school year and through the summertime too. And they're learning who they are by what the stories you're telling them. So please be careful of those stories that you're telling them. And remember that you're not the only one, right? That symphony that Jill was talking about, that symphony is, to me, the beauty of what America is. There was talk about our exhibition using artists as curators and how cute and quaint that was. And I just love the artist-led exhibitions. They're very nice. Artists have such an unusual perspective on things. Jill and I didn't choose just artists. We chose those people that had cultural capital, like what Heather was talking about. We chose the people that have the knowledge and are the expressors of that knowledge. That's what our artists are in our communities. They're the ones that we go to when we want to look right. When I want to look Kiowa, I know who to go to so that I look proper, that I read right. And those were the women that we were talking to. So I guess my shout out, my final words or whatever is going to be just that. Please, museum people coming in and out of museums, just visitors, just anyone in general, what is the story they're telling you in that museum? Hold their feet to the fire and ask them who's on their board of trustees and their boards of directors. Because if that board looks all white, boy, I tell you, that's not a museum to go visit. And that's not a museum to contribute to if you're a donor level. All right, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Jill, Heather?
Heather, you want to go ahead?
Sure. That way you can be the last voice. You should be the last voice. There you go. Well, of course, Hearts of Our People came together and the advisory board when I was working at the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art at the University of Oklahoma. And watching the process of this exhibition has certainly had an influence on me, if nothing more than just to affirm my belief that our indigenous values, our indigenous cultures, and that are strong enough to carry the responsibilities of building both a museum exhibition programs and also and to work from, right, as a centering concept, to work in museums, which are colonial institutions, that we can do that as an indigenous curator. And so when the opportunity was given to me to work at First Americans Museum, a lot of the principles that came out of this, really, I was like, I'm just going to lay it all down on the line, and I'm going to do exactly what Hearts of Our People did, but for our whole department, right? So Hearts of Our People had that impact on what's going to come at First Americans Museum. And we were able to hire and not that it needs to be, but an all Native curatorial team and people who, you know, come with different kinds of knowledge. And let me just say, this didn't necessarily make it easier than working in a non-Native institution. I want to point that out. In some ways, it was more emotional because, you know, I'll be honest, I did get to a point where I could sit in a room as the only person of color, a woman, sitting at that table and could hold my own at OU. And I could do that. And Christina has seen it, and Jill has seen it, and I have, what do you say, built up thick enough skin that I don't take the sort of microaggressions that happen in those environments. They don't get to me, you know. I might, you know, punch a bag afterwards, but I don't punch people anymore. But I think that bringing an all Native team together, we still had to work very hard. These were still incredibly emotionally laden conversations because we were all working and wanting to hold that bar so high. And I think you can see in Hearts of Our People how high that bar was set. There's not a weak object in that exhibition. There's never been a weak object in that exhibition. And even as it has had to shift and be slightly reduced as it's traveled, it's still an incredibly powerful exhibition. And bringing that together for First Americans Museum, we were able to do that. And we've had an amazing team in the curatorial team to work with, and everybody has brought their A game. And, you know, centering those 4 R's of respect, relationship, reciprocity, and responsibility, we've been able to make the decisions, I think, that will show people that this can be institutionalized. And I think that's really important because Hearts of Our People lifted that bar and gave me the courage to bring this to an institution. And not to say that the institution didn't want it. That's not at all the truth. I think it was, you know, that it was just the right time and the institution was there at the right moment. But our museum is getting ready to open in September 2021. There are more immediate issues at hand that Hearts of Our People has done. One is that we can see across the board in the last year and a half, the number of new curatorial positions within departments across the United States. Certainly, we can think about the Met, and we can think about like Montclair Art Museum, and we can think about, and I'm sorry, maybe you guys can help me with some of the others, that there are multiple museums that have actually said, maybe we really need a curator to work with this art that is somebody who really understands that. And thankfully, the bar has been set that you need to come with some of this knowledge of this cultural capital in order to be able to do that job. Like, it's not just that you got a PhD in a field, that you need to be able to have the conversations that need to. And this is something I think that the Indigenous community has to, we're gonna have to take a deep breath and help hold these people up and hold up the curators while we hold the institutions accountable to doing what's right by the collections that they have been bearers of, right? They've been holding these collections in vaults and, you know, putting little piecemeal out in the gallery. That's no longer really acceptable for us. And I think that there's enough of a movement, and Hearts of Our People has been part of that. There's no way you can't talk about what's happened in the last 2 years and not think that this one exhibition, and that's not to say it's all from Hearts of Our People, but it is to say that I think that it had enough broad recognition to understand there's a new paradigm being set. And I have to tell you, I rarely have conversations with other museum professionals that they don't go, yeah, we need to do what they did with Hearts of Our People. I mean, it is the bar, and that's the bar that's been set. I hear it, I can testify to it, and I think that that's really powerful. And then I think,
Ask an Indian. Ask us. We know stuff. Just ask us. Give us the mic. We got lots to say. Oh God. Please.
but I think more than that, Teri, is that it's no longer okay to just do a one and done advisory panel.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other bar that's been set. Is not only somebody who's taking care of the art and thinking of the art, who is willing to have that voice, but also that ticking the box off on the grant, that really, that's not enough anymore. And if you don't know what it means to do it better, then you need to ask an Indian, and please do, because there's enough of us, and there's enough of us coming up. And all of us that are working in the field now, and including all the ladies on this panel, we're mentoring young professionals who are coming up. So there is a wave coming, and it is a tsunami, and you either are gonna ride this or you're gonna get washed over for it. That's my thoughts on that. So step up, because we could really do some really good, not just for Indian art, but we could do the same model can be done with art and culture from all over the world. Indigenous cultures, we are ready to help you understand why we tried to survive, why our elders have sacrificed to such depths, and they were willing to sacrifice to hold on to our cultures. These things are worth it. And I think there's value that could benefit, I don't know, I'm getting all befuddled, but there's so much good that can come from this. So let's do it together. We don't have to be, you know, us or them. It can be us and all of us.
Well, how can I say anything after that? Per usual. So I should have gone before Heather. But I'm just going to say three, if we have time, just three main things. And it's all drawing upon what Heather has said. Momentum, and I've said this before, people told us we couldn't do it. People told Teri and I all the time, you can't have 21 people and come to agreement and do a show like this. You can't have 100 loans from 70 different art institutions. You can't have 41 contributors. You can't have consensus. You can't do this. You can't do that. Well, we showed them that you can. So no longer can museums say you can't do this. So that was in part why our board did this, to show that you can do this. Second, to exactly what Heather and Teri and Anita said, this is additive. Their museums do not need to fear this idea of these in their minds of this notions of what curatorial authority and curatorial control is. You do not need to fear additive voices that expand understanding, expand the world. Expand the world. And then three, the last thing that I'll point out that I'm going to just get quickly on my soapbox is that while I recognize that there's a great deal of work being done in art institutions around the United States, in contemporary work particularly, I would argue that it is supremely important to include to not have it through primarily the perspective of Western art, but to have it from the perspectives of Indigenous art, in that not just 2D and conceptual art, not just stuff that makes people seem comfortable with, oh, I can kind of relate to that because that fits within the Western canon. You know, all what our Hearts of Our People showed is these master artists doing these work from a variety of mediums that should be included in these exhibitions. People like Anita Fields, people like D.Y. Begay, people like Evelyn Vanderhook, people like Jodie Falwell, people like Roxanne Swensel. All of these women should be in these major exhibitions just because they work in different mediums that aren't 2D necessarily. They are pushing the field. They are technically brilliant. They are masterful. They are knowledgeable, and that's what I'm committed to working on in the future, and that's what I think that that would be helpful to push forward.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And having worked in a variety of kinds of institutions, from the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian for a little bit, having worked at a small museum on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the Heritage Center at Red Cloud Indian School, and then at Philbrook Museum of Art. These are all very different kinds of institutions, but regardless of the size, the scale, the funding source for those institutions, it has been a privilege and a responsibility to work with Native collections and Native communities throughout. And one of the things that I'm constantly saying and sometimes fighting against, or fighting for, I should say, is recognizing these collections as art, not artifacts, not historical. These are cultural arts, regardless of the material, the techniques, the time frame of their creation. They are arts writ large. And for me, one of the powerful aspects of Hearts of Our People is the variety, the diversity, the symphony of arts that are represented, from dance and movement, the clip of Maria Tallchief, to the poetry, to the literary arts, et cetera, and then thinking about the programming that has happened with community members in each of the venues, and thinking about very broadly about what's next, not just as an exhibition that has a time frame, right? It opens, it's up for a while, visitors come, and then it's gone. But how do those relationships with individuals and communities continue? What are those responsibilities and that reciprocity, that dynamic back and forth? It's not a one-way street. There has got to be dialogue and reciprocity back and forth. And I have to say in this public forum, what an incredible honor it is to work with you all and on this project. And I will never forget that Sunday in September of 2014, hosting Teri and her mom, Jerry, for a tour of Philbrook downtown. And in talking about exhibitions and collections and programs and Native arts in general, and Teri kept like turning away from me and taking these notes in this little notebook she had and asking me questions and then saying, well, I want to talk to you about this project, but I don't know, maybe not yet. But that from that experience with you and your mom, Teri, that Sunday in September of 2014, to now, a Sunday in October in 2020, it's been an incredible journey, and I really look forward to what's next. Well, we do have a couple of questions from folks who've been listening in. And I apologize for if I mispronounce your last name, Gwen, but Gwen Shunatona, as a member of the board of directors of the Museum of the Pawnee Nation, what would you all think of a collaborative exhibit from all the tribal museums in Oklahoma?
Sounds amazing.
I will be there. Where? When?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You know, we were talking earlier before we start, Christina and I were talking about the synergy that happens off of something when it's done really well and it's done really, you know, in a good way, in a right, that it creates its own energy, and then things just start spinning out of it. And, you know, that's exactly what your idea is, you know, something like that. Yeah, we've got great tribal museums here.
Beautiful ones and important ones. And you know, the idea of flyover, as Oklahoma being a flyover state, is so funny to me, because to me it's always been like the New York City of Indian art. It's like going to Venice or something. Like I go to Oklahoma. That's where I go, because if you want to see, and it's tribal museums. You know, it's smaller museums. It's our doings. It's our doings. It's going to our doings too, if you really want to see. So I don't know.
So her follow-up question is where, when, and how?
So I as a curator, this is your idea, Gwen. Make it happen. Like, start the conversation with the people in the community. I mean, and this isn't saying that I'm not interested in, you know, supporting it or being a part of it. I'm just saying that this is where we shift things. When we have a good idea, then we have to put it to work. And, you know, Hearts of Our People, this is born out of conversations between Teri and Jill for much longer than what we're even giving credit to, as far as like what it's taken to make this exhibition happen. And so if that's an idea, then start having the conversation with the other members of the other tribal museums and start to make it happen. It'd be fantastic to see that. It would be wonderful to see that. I think just as a member of the Oklahoma community, it would be really wonderful to see the tribal museums working collaboratively, because I think it's often sometimes in our community that we're positioned as either tribal communities or tribal members, not having an interest in working actively with our you know, other tribes, right? Like everybody's sort of holding their own ground. Well, that's not really true politically. We know that our tribes have alliances. We know our tribes have ongoing relationships with one another. And it's part of why we've been able to do what we have been able to do, which is really amazing in Oklahoma. But to see that happening from a tribal museum, that would be very powerful. And I think that it would have a lot of potential for the tribes to be able to step in and help support that. And the funding wouldn't even have to come from the tribes. I mean, it should, I'll say that. I think the tribes should be supporting it, but it wouldn't have to come only from that. Because I know Hearts of Our People got funding from tribal communities in Minnesota, right? And really handed off to Jill. And Jill, why don't you talk about some of the things that you did that helped us fund Hearts of Our People?
Yeah, to that point too, and that in a lot of these talks that Teri and I have given, one of the things that we really want to highlight is that foundations want to support these kinds of projects. And so we raised over $1.5 million, I believe, $1.2 to $1.5 million. And that was because people were committed to our not just committed to the honoring Native women artists across time and place, but they were perhaps most invested in our curatorial process, in our methodology, in believing in the way in which we did things. And so foundational money, like the Luce Foundation, like the Penny and Bill George Foundation, other foundations came, NEH came. They wanted to support these things. So for people who are interested in this, something like this, there are so many resources out there that want to support this collaborative. This is the future, and people are committed to this, and foundations and governmental institutions and Native nations, they want to support this kind of work.
I think that we have actually, like, I was drawing upon things that I knew, and that's how the organization ideas came about. And so I think that I would say, go do it Indian way. If you want to, you know how to set up meetings between other tribes and other people, and you know how to ask correctly. You know how to, you need something and whatever. So do it Indian way. And I really do think that's part of the money came because they understood that we were going about it in a way that was going to get results. You know, I think if you go about it that way, you're going to get results because you know how to communicate with people in a way. We had a meeting early on with Shakopee, and I was there for that, and I talked to them as an Indian person. I didn't talk to them as a curator, I didn't talk to them as a museum person or whatever. I talked to them Indian to Indian, and I said, this is what, like, I see, this is what we need to have happen, and we need money for this, and you know, and I'm looking to support Indian women all the way through this, from beginning to end, having many women's voices, all the way down to that damn gift shop. I want not stuff made in China in there. I want, you know, our women in that gift shop. So all the way through it, and they heard me, and they gave us money. And I think that that's what kind of carried through was that. So I would love to see a multi-tribal exhibition. Just and there is money for it. Jill's right on about that. There is money for this, but go at it in your own way and see if that works.
Well, one of the things that I think is important about what's next, and Anita and I have certainly talked a lot about this, is the significance of having non-Native organizations, institutions, whether they're art museums, fellowship programs, et cetera, include Native art and Native voices in their programming, not just as the Native show that's up in November, but a show of photography and include Native photographers, a show of basketry and include Native basket weavers. So not to separate out Native artists only in Native art shows, but include them across the board. And Anita, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Sure, I think that's really important. You know, to do otherwise kind of creates division, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we don't need, you know, with as many, what we have previously with as many tribes that exist. I'm just going to talk about Oklahoma specifically, as many tribes as exist here, you know, that is something that doesn't need to happen really. And we have such brilliant makers, creators of the most important objects that say so much about where we come from and who we are. And that's just, you just can't, you know, you can't find it everywhere. You know, sometimes when I've done a lecture, I've had people come up to me afterwards and say, you have such a beautiful culture to draw from. And I tell them, you do too. You do too. All you have to do is look in your backyard, you know. And for an artist, you know, that's so important. So these institutions, you know, the galleries, the exhibitions, yes, you need to, you know, with all of this, we have to make our own future. It's up to us, you know, to create what's going to happen in the future, and that goes for everybody on all sides. Christina and I talked earlier about, you know, through the Tulsa Arts Fellowship, my son is also a fellow, and his integrated grant project is to bring Native muralists here to Oklahoma to create a landscape of Native art, to create a presence of Native people here. He brought Nanny Chacon in and her assistant Lynette Houses 2 weeks ago, that mural was created. It has created on its own, it's a gathering place. There have been 3 events down there already in the parking lot. The man who owns the building, it houses a collection of his, is extremely generous and said, yeah, the wall sounds great. It's across the street from the Tulsa Indian, the Indian clinic. So the way it kind of worked out is just amazing. You know, they have a lot of difficulty trying to find a wall. The way that it unfolded and the way that it happened is really amazing. So again, you know, creating these spaces for people, creating a place for people. You know, the arts are real important in that. And so many ways to go about it, so many ways to achieve it. You know, it's really just, we could go on and on and on. It's very endless because there's so many ways, like you were talking about, of it's not just visual art. It's not just, it's, you know, it's filmmaking, it's writing, it's everything. It's performance, it's dance. It makes me so happy when I go in there and see Maria, tall chief dancing at the Philbrook Museum. The pride that I have as an Osage person to see that. And so when Native people connect, with the things that we put out there in exhibitions or on a wall or on a mural, the community responds, with great pride. And to me, that's the importance of, the future and, what is going to go on in the future, how we're going to keep this, the continuum that we've been talking about for the last, every time we all gather,
If I could just add one thing, is that we've been in this conversation, and naturally so, because we're talking about Hearts of Our People being hosted, has been largely hosted in these arts institutions, arts, museums. But I think one of the things that is really important, because like you're touching on the ways that Native art can be incorporated into broader sort of inclusionary exhibitions based on medium, but I think also intellectually, our Native arts can be used in science. It can be taught, it can be used in history museums, it can be used in, and that's one of the things that it's really critical for us to not just think about it as aesthetically as beautiful, but to remember that our Native arts is like, it's the reason it's such an important expression of our culture is that it is a living component that helps us to remember how to be Indigenous people, that in the way that we have handled the materials and the way that we've prepared the information that's going in there, these things are multivalent. And just, in this conversation today, Teri has mentioned, oh, well, we can look at the stars. We can look, it's absolutely true, because that kind of knowledge is encoded into our art. We can also think about the way that our cultural politics are encoded into our art. There are so many ways that we can use, and Native art has been really, in a way, it's been squashed to this single plane because it was easier for a Western mind to approach it that way. And I think if we could leave you with anything, and I'm not sure that I'm having the last word here, but if we could say anything here, it's that our Native arts, it is so much more than what people have been given an opportunity to even know about. And that's what bringing our Native voices into this exhibition helped us to be able to elaborate that little bit of a wedge that we created through just an exhibition that was focused on art. But our Native arts have the capacity to be speaking on topics that are much more potentially humanistic broadly. And this is what Indigenous cultures have done. We have coded our knowledge into the objects and the things that we have made. And it is everything from the personal and political and economic and spiritual, and all of those things are all in there. And it is looking at the whole of that really there's something beautiful that we have to offer the world, that the world has not even been able to have that conversation yet. And I believe that Hearts of Our People created a wedge for us. And I hope that whoever is out on listening to this, and I don't even know how many people, like probably my mom is on here, maybe Tom Fields is on here. But I'm just saying, it's like, I don't know who's listening. Gwen is listening. So and I'm sorry if I messed up your name, Gwen, but I mean, there's so much potential. And I'm just really grateful that, Jill, that you had the faith to bring this and to take this to the Minneapolis Institute of Art and do this. And at the end of the day, Jill, I'm so proud to call you my friend. I love you so much.
Love you. I mean, it was just, it's a group effort. I mean, it's the power of the collective, right? It's the power of the collective. It's the power of Teri and I building, knowing exactly all these brilliant women to bring together, I mean, that's the power of it. Teri and I have always said, the power is in the board. The power is it's not in Teri and I hand. It's not in our hands.
I know that, and Teri knows that, but Jill, you had to be at the institution.
Yes.
And that was a very particular place to have to claim that. And that's what I'm trying to draw. And Teri, you know that I love you more than words. There are words for that in English to express that. But Jill, you had to carry this responsibility at an institution. And Christina has had to carry that same responsibility as hosting it at Philbrook. And it's really important for us to acknowledge you guys in these roles, because if you weren't willing to share that authority, if you weren't willing to hold that space to let us come in, this would be a very different exhibition, very different experience.
It should be standard practice. It's nothing, to me, it's only the right way to do things, you know, it's the way that I was taught, you know, it's the way that we were taught, right? It's just the right way of doing things. Thank you, everybody.
That kind of humility is not the norm in the art industry at all. From curators to gallery owners to collectors, that kind of humility is just not in the art world. You know, collecting Indian stuff and collecting Indians is a game. It's a part of American identity, right? It's what has helped create the idea of what is American, our art, what we do. Most of it's women's art too. The beadwork and the feathers and the fringe and all that stuff hanging off the bikers and, you know, up on decorating people's guns and whatnot. All that stuff, that's all women's art. So I'm not sure where I was going with this, but other than a thank you, Jill, because I know that you took some serious hits for this. And this is what I'm talking about, passing the mic and turning it over and trusting that we actually have something to say about this. I mean, what you were talking about, Heather, earlier is this idea, and it, you know, it's so bothersome to Native people, who, like, you know, love our arts and understand things and whatever. When you go into a non-Native space and you see our things in there and you see them on display, what you are seeing is goo-goo gaga talk about our work. Because the understanding of the levels that are going on inside of all of that, what you call decoration or design, you have missed so much. I was speaking with my friend next door and she was talking about a Zuni friend of hers, and the Zuni friend of hers was telling her about the number 4. Conceptually, the 4 directions. Great. But it was so much more than that. It has to do with male and female. It has to do with how the seasons are. It has to do with the earth aligned with the sky. There is so much in the number 4. So if you look at something Zuni and it has 4 on it, and all you understand is the 4 directions, that's baby goo goo gaga talk. You don't know nothing. You understand nothing about what that artist was doing, what that person was trying to put forth, that information. We're talking about philosophy. We're talking about religion. We're talking about the sciences. We're talking about the humanities. All of that is coded, like Heather was saying, and embedded into these things. So when you go into a non-Native space like the Met or whatever, and you see how things are curated, and you read the little blurb and you're like, golly, they don't know nothing about this. They don't know nothing about this. That was the reaction that we were having. I think that's the reaction that all the Native ladies that were asked to be on this board had, because we'd all had those experiences. So, and I know that Christina and Jill, you guys know that too. Like all of the women that were on the board understood that there was just this lack of understanding of, actually, you mean all of the indigenous art that we've seen in all of these exhibitions of antiquities, most of it's made by women, but there's never been a female pronoun on any of the didactics anywhere? You mean none of these fancy books I have up here talking about Indian art talk about the fact that mostly it was the women that held that knowledge and was able to produce it in those mediums that are held up now? You ask anybody across the world, close your eyes and think of something Indian. What are they going to think of? They're going to think of eagle feathers, and they're going to think of beadwork. They're going to think about women's work. That's what they're going to think about. Again, on my soapbox, I'm sorry.
Well, and not just Indigenous women, but as individual artists.
Yeah.
Mary
Not
Sully.
just individual artists, they are literally the teachers of the culture. We create the human beings, and then we decorate the human beings, and we make things for the human beings, and we pray over the human beings, and we talk to the human beings, and we tell them our stories, and we sing them our songs, and we give them all of this. And then our art is put up all in these museums all over the place, and nowhere until recently, until Hearts of Our People in 2020, what? Finally recognizes that it's women that were doing this? Y'all have been not paying attention is all I can say. And that makes every single museum that I've been in that doesn't have a Native curator in it, that has Native things, look like goo goo gaga stuff to me. It looks ridiculous. It looks silly. So that's I guess where all of this comes from, is because I'm like, I don't know. Anyway, And I'm so grateful to the people that I have met in this industry that have that knowledge and are aware of the fact that Indian art actually is part and parcel to American art. And that American art on the world stage does not exist without the influence of Native art, and specifically Native women. Native women, the concept of abstraction that is everywhere in my beadwork. It's everywhere in all that parfleche work. It's everywhere in the baskets that I see and the textile. It's pottery. It's everywhere. Abstraction is a feminine ideal. How are we just now coming to that? Because there are gatekeepers. There are gatekeepers. And I think that the reason why I was able to do this exhibition is because a woman had actually been in charge of the gate, Jill. And that woman knew things that I knew too as a woman. Not as an Indian person or whatever, but as a woman. And that's what helped break this open. And that's why she was willing to stand at that door too and help defend that space. Because the space isn't bigger picture. The space isn't just male, isn't just Indian art. Now we're talking male and female. Now we're talking the patriarchy. And now we're starting to understand what America is and the hierarchy of what this system is that we live in. And that is encoded in how our art has been looked at. And it is a part of everything that I know, and I see my own people, they don't go that way. All right. These people I live among over here, these public people, they don't go that way either. And to recognize that and to understand that actually what we're dealing with here is a large systematic issue. That's why when you ask me the significance of having it in Oklahoma, the significance is because of Indian removal. Because this stuff goes way back to the beginning. It goes back to them white people dressing up like Indians and jumping off some damn ship in a tea party thing, all right? That's where it goes back to. We are American identity. We are you.
Aho.
You know, it's Tonkonga this weekend. It was supposed to be.
Well, I think we're coming up to our time here, but I just want to take the opportunity to say, Mado, Niawen, Pilama Yeye, thank you, Aho, to all of you for all of the work you've done, not just on this project and this exhibition, but the work that you have been doing for decades, and I know will continue to do. I'm really honored to know you and to be able to work with you. And I thank you so much for your many contributions.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Yes.
And we look forward to what's next, whatever that may be. Working with tribal institutions, working with non-native organizations, working in public art, performances, etc. So stay tuned. Looking forward to opening First Americans Museum next fall.
Yes.
September 18th, 2021. Plan to be in OKC.
I was just going to say, put it in the chat.
Yeah, write it in the chat.
Thank you all. Thank you to the audience.
Thank you, everybody.